Hey there guys, it's Kyle with the ReVIEW YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about the smallest FPV quadcopter on the market, the Hubsan X4 H107D. Stay tuned because this is a review. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be talking about this quadcopter right here, the Hubsan X4 H107D. What makes it special is that it has FPV integrated into the system for a really affordable price. Just a few weeks back on the show, we talked about a kit from Drone Pros that was a mini quad and completely ready to fly with everything you need to get in the air. But that was around $450 or $500, which isn't exactly affordable for a lot of people, especially if they're just kind of wanting to test the waters and not really put in tons of money towards the purchase. So this is the perfect way to try out FPV and see if it's something you're really interested in. So this kit comes in at under $150, which is quite cheap, and with that includes everything you need to get in the air, including the battery, the charger, the transmitter with a monitor on it to display the FPV, and of course the quadcopter itself, as well as some small accessories like a tool to get the props off, as well as a few extra propellers, which you'll definitely be needing. So one of the first things to talk about is the transmitter. This is actually one of the nicest transmitters included with any toy grade quadcopter. It has a really nice feel to it, especially if you've used any hobby grade quadcopters prior to it. It has that nice feel. It does have a really nice cut to it, and it is plastic. It feels cheap, but for the price, it's what you're gonna expect and get. The gimbals on it are relatively smooth and very easy to move, which when you're doing FPV flight is a must. And then of course you have the screen on it, and it actually does have this little screen protector that you're able to take off, and that's what's included with it. And then you have the standard stuff like your trim buttons, the on-off switch, and then a few buttons like that. This is actually more advanced transmitter than you get with most quads because it needs to be, since you have FPV integrated. You have a little menu on the screen, so you're able to change things like you're able to format the SD card, change your gains, which is something you can't do on most quadcopters, and all sorts of that in a sub menu on the transmitter, which you hit reach by just clicking down on one of the sticks. Other things you can change on the transmitter are turning the LEDs on the quadcopter on and off, and then turning flip mode on and off. As well as that in that advanced menu, you're able to change the gains like I was saying, as well as switch from normal mode to expert mode, which is just automatically changing the gains from 50 out of 100 to 100 out of 100, which just makes the quad more sensitive. So now back to the quadcopter itself. The first and most prominent thing you'll notice is that it is extremely small. This is a good thing because it makes it way more portable as well as cheaper. However, it's a bad thing because the small motors are gonna have to put in way more work in order to keep it in the air. So I'm guessing in the future we may have an issue with some of the motors burning out or something along those lines, which would be really bad, but we'll keep you updated in the comments below with a long-term review of this. All in all though, the size is awesome, and because it's small, usually a lot of the time you're not gonna get very good control because it's so lightweight, because obviously the smaller the quad, the less weight it needs to be in order to stay in the air. And saying this thing has FPV in it is generally a bad thing because you're gonna have extra weight, thus smaller flight times and all this. But with this, we're able to get over 7 minutes of flight time, which is way more than I'm able to get with most nano quads this size. But that's using an upgraded 500 milliamp hour one cell battery, as opposed to the stock battery, which is 360 milliamp hours, I believe. The nice thing about that is the extra weight is actually beneficial because it makes it way more stable in the air. The only disadvantage to the extra weight is that when you're yawing a lot of the time, it'll kind of get twitchy and almost fall out of the air because it can't handle that extra weight when some of your motors are turning down in RPMs to yaw. As for the overall build quality, I'm extremely impressed. When it comes to these toy grade quadcopters, especially the Chinese ones, I'll find some design flaw that really puts me off of the overall quad and makes it so I don't want to fly it after I finish reviewing it, which I don't think is going to be the case with this one, as I really enjoyed flying it. The smart thing about this design is that as opposed to just breaking off an arm if you crash really hard, instead this one just snaps apart. The arms just snap off whenever you bump into something quite hard, and all you have to do is just kind of shove down and you're able to click the arm back in place. And it's the same thing for the main body. So I've had crashes where two of the arms completely snap out, as well as like the main part of the body, but the quad itself is completely fine and all I'll have to do is snap it back on. So after extreme crashes, pretty much the hardest thing you're ever gonna see in normal environment, I'm still not even getting close to breaking the frame, which is extremely nice. So the last thing to note about the overall build is the landing gear. They have these rubber feet that make taking off super easy because it sticks to any hard surface so you don't drift one way or another on takeoff. The one thing I don't like about the build is the propellers. When I first saw the kit, it comes with the tool to take off the propellers, which I thought was extremely nice because a lot of these are really hard to take off and you end up bending the propellers if you want to take them off for some reason. And that's something I didn't like, so I was happy to see that was included. But after flying this, almost every single, even very minor crash I have, the propellers fly off. And it's kind of a good thing because you're not going to break them or bust them up, but at the same time, it's extremely annoying, especially when you're flying FPV. If you're flying a relatively far distance, you're going to have to get up every minor crash you have, search for the propeller, which is extremely annoying, and then put it back on the craft. So after flying it only a couple days now, I've already lost almost all the replacement propellers. So that's one of my largest complaints overall, is that it makes the propellers just fly off even in a minor crash, which isn't horrible, but it is definitely annoying. One of the last things about this quadcopter I wanted to talk to you about is the FPV, the first person view, which is probably the reason you're considering buying this quadcopter and the reason you'll end up buying it. I've been extremely impressed with this small video transmitter. Usually with a video transmitter this small, you're going to get horrible range and barely any penetration through walls, especially since it's 5.8 gigahertz. But that's not what we've been experiencing at all. I'm able to fly through my entire house, no issue, no real interference, and definitely no blue screening or anything like that. As for range outdoors, I'm getting almost exactly the same thing, which usually on 5.8 gigahertz, since we're in Houston, a large city, we have tons of interference from other signals, but I haven't had that occurring at all. So it's been a really pleasant experience for the FPV. However, I will say my biggest complaint overall with this quadcopter, and what almost makes it a deal breaker for me, is the field of view of the camera, which is basically how much you're able to see. For us humans, we have peripheral vision, which makes it easy for us to know where we're going. With a quad like this, the field of view you would expect to be at least 90 degrees, hopefully larger. Most quadcopters you're flying FPV with have well over 120 degrees of field of view. This one, on the other hand, has 45 degrees of field of view. So you're basically only seeing this much of what's ahead of you, which makes it super hard to fly fully immersive FPV. So a lot of the times when I'm flying, I'm mostly using the FPV to show it to someone else. I'll be flying line of sight and just kind of flying through my house and letting someone watch on, kind of join me for the ride. Or I'm using it to glance at and then mainly flying line of sight. I haven't been able to do much full FPV simply because of the very narrow field of view, even though I have tons of experience flying FPV. It does fly extremely nice overall. The quadcopter is exactly what you expect. It is very similar to the Hubsan X4 H107D, the same as this pretty much without FPV. It flies similarly. The flight characteristics are awesome, occasionally a little bit twitchy, especially on the expert mode. And as I mentioned earlier, on that yaw, it'll kind of lose its balance and almost crash. The flips are subpar in my opinion, but most people don't care about that. But you have to have a lot of altitude on that. But overall, I love this quadcopter. The fact that FPV is included at this price point and at this size is absolutely incredible. Even at the toy grade market, the only other thing comparable is the SD's Proto X FPV or the Blade Nano QX FPV, both of which cost quite a bit more than this one. So this is still gonna be my go-to affordable FPV quadcopter, but the one thing you're gonna have to do is buy a new lens for it to put on this one to give you a larger field of view if you wanna fly full FPV. Another nice thing about the FPV on this is you are able to use Fat Shark goggles, which is awesome if you already own them, otherwise they're kind of expensive. And the fact that you have a monitor on the transmitter is extremely nice. So unlike the Blade Nano QX FPV, you're not gonna have an initial investment of $200 or more for goggles. You have that monitor built in, which is actually quite nice. So all in all, I've really enjoyed this quadcopter. It flies great. I would highly recommend it as long as you're willing to pay the little bit extra for a new lens. I'll have a link to the description below to buy a lens to increase your field of view. All in all, thank you so much for watching. We'll have the links in the description below where you can buy this quadcopter. We'd like to thank GearBest for sending it out to us to review. Make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed. Comment below with any questions on this quadcopter or anything in the multi-rotor hobby. And lastly, subscribe to us for weekly videos. Thanks again for watching, and we're going to leave you with this.